On both the transform and add column tabs in the ribbon, you will see that there's a group of buttons: scientific, standard, statistics, trigonometry, rounding, and information on both the transform and in the add column. And so this video I want to show you how these work. So in this case, I'm just going to use the orders 1997 to 2000 query, and I'm just going to use the gross column, though you could use any column that had numbers in it. If I click on this gross column, let's start with rounding. Now I don't want to transform what's in this column. I want to add so you can see the difference. So I'm going to go to add and I'm going to go to rounding, and let's say round up. It immediately creates a column called round up, and you can see the 68.75 has been rounded up to 69, and the 16.5 has been rounded up to 17, whereas the 61.25 is rounded up to 62. So that's what the round up does. Let me delete that. If I select gross again, go add column, go rounding, let's say round down, then you'll see that it's actually rounded the figure down despite the decimal places. Let's delete that, and let's have a look at gross, rounding, and round. Now when you choose round, you actually get to say how many decimal places do you want to round to. So I might say round me to 2 decimal places, and OK. And immediately you can see that you have got a column that's been added called round, and it's been rounded to 2 decimal places. It's not necessarily formatted to 2 decimal places, it's been rounded to 2 decimal places. And I'll delete that step. Okay, so that's the rounding options. Let's have a look at the information buttons. So I've got the gross column chosen. I go to information and I'm asking, is the gross value even? If it is even, it'll say true. This one here says false because 175 is not an even number. So you can ask it to give you a true or false result if the value is even. And likewise, if I deleted that and said, look, tell me if the gross is odd, then it would tell me that. And so it's telling me whether it's odd or not. And I can delete that. And if I choose gross and go to information and sign basically returns a 1 if the number is positive, and a 0 if the number is 0, and a -1 if it's negative. So really we're not going to get much except for 1 because these are all positive numbers greater than 0. So that's not going to illustrate very well in this example. Okay. What about trigonometry? If you understand trigonometry, you can go to here and you can ask for the sine or the cosine or the tangent or the arc sine, arc cosine, or arc tangent. But if you're not familiar with these terms, it's not probably going to give you a lot of value. But this, for example, is in terms of trigonometry, is the sine value of that value. And so I can delete that particular step. But if you're into trigonometry, they could be very, very helpful. What about scientific? So for example, if I click on gross and I go to scientific and I ask for an absolute value, an absolute value will return a column with all of these numbers in it, but any negatives will be shown as positives and any positives will remain positive. So absolute value it adds a column of gross values because that's what I've got selected, with no negatives showing. Whereas power and square will give you the square of each of these values. And cube will give you the cube of each of these values. So if you're into square, cubed, or to the power of, that's when you use these here. If you want the square root, we can use this option here, and it gives us the square root of 110. And if I delete that step and choose gross again, other scientific options include exponent, logarithmic, and factorial. So you can use those two if they are terms you're familiar with. Another group of functions we can use is standard. And so, for example, I might say add. and it'll ask me, what number do you want to add to each of these gross values? So maybe there's a standard fee, a booking fee of $3.50. And so when I go OK, it'll create a new column called addition, which grabs the gross value and naturally adds $3.50 to every value. So that's what add does. And the others work along the same vein. If I choose gross and I go to standard, I could multiply all of these values by a certain percentage. So if I wanted to say, what's the GST? In New Zealand, it is 15%. So multiply it by 0.15, for example, and OK. And so that's the GST of each of these gross values, 15%. Likewise, subtract will take away a consistent value from every gross value. Divide integer. Basically, it's a single column that is divided by a specific value. Modulo, this one here, will return the remainder when one number is divided by another number. And percentage returns the percentage value when a column is multiplied by a specific percentage and percentage of a certain value. So these are quite handy as well, standard functions that you can apply. When it comes to statistical, I'd probably go to the transform tab. And if you go to statistics and you say, give me the sum, then it literally has added those all up. And so that is the total sum of all the gross values. If I delete that step and go back to gross and select gross and go back to transform and choose statistics, I can ask it to give me the smallest value of the entire gross column, the largest value, the median, the average, the standard deviation, count how many values there are, which is effectively the number of non-null values, and then count the number of distinct values. So don't count the duplicates. What it does though is replace the entire table with a single value. So I'll delete that step. So you may actually want to duplicate this query, which we've looked at in previous videos. I might just duplicate it and then maybe rename it. So I'll press F2 and call it total value, total gross value. And then with that, I would turn around and select the gross column. And under transform, choose statistics and then choose sum. And that would give me a single value without losing all the information in this orders table. So you can make a duplicate or 2 or 3 of this, and then you could use the statistics to give you an aggregate result. And you can convert it back to a table using this button as well. Yeah, and then use that in your reports. So that sheds some light onto these various types of functions: trigonometry, rounding, information, scientific, standard, statistical, on both the add column and the transform tabs in the ribbon.